I am sorry to hear about the death of your friends, Mr. Leonardo began. He was not offended by seeing hatred on Aladdin's face. You want revenge on the bounty hunters who killed your partners, right? Continued the multi-billionaire. Aladdin still did not answer. Mr. Leonardo raised an eyebrow. I wouldn't be surprised if you thought I had something to do with what happened, but I want to remove all suspicion from myself. He pretended to consider something. What would you say if I told you that one of your two newfound enemies was about to die because of me? What do you mean? Aladdin asked back, somewhat disrespectfully. The offer was unexpected. He knew that there must be a hidden motive, but after some reflection he concluded that if there was, it would not be to his detriment. I don't understand why you are making this offer. I only want peace, said Mr. Leonardo with a smirk. Promise me that you will not cross me if one of the assassins dies tragically in the near future. They are not the ones responsible for this. That's right. But in the future, all their colleagues would wonder whether it is worth it to take jobs against you or against me for that matter. Excuse me, sir, but what do you mean by one of them? I wouldn't be a good player if I'd shown my cards. Either the inexperienced but talented one, or the professional but lacking in ideas. Both have faults that can be exploited. The no-name bounty hunter is not a problem, but I know someone who once outsmarted even Demolochis. Aladdin was agitated by Mr. Leonardo's company. He was wiser than to believe him. The agent wiped his close-cropped mustache with a napkin, just in case any of the soup he had been spooning stuck on it. He had to eat to avoid suspicion, but really he was there to listen in on the conversation at the table next to him. You must be kidding, sir. You and I both know he would kill me without breaking a sweat. Garaphort sat opposite Mr. Leonardo in a perfect brand new suit. It was given to him in the car that picked him up and took him to the posh cafe. I know it's not an easy task, but believe me, I can reward you. No doubt, sir, but I can't do much with your money in the afterlife. Garaphort shook his head. I don't know why I'm still here. Mr. Leonardo had expected Garaphort to be neither arrogant nor crazy enough to accept the offer for Demolochis's head. He spoke in a condescending tone. You are here because you know I called you for a reason. I like you, so I advise you to accept the assignment because... Mr. Leonardo lowered his voice, only breathing out the words. Garaphort had to lean quite close to hear him. Next to them, the agent couldn't understand anything. You bastard, Garaphort whispered. Mr. Leonardo's expression darkened ominously. Learn to control your temper. He was hired by you, wasn't he? Mr. Leonardo smiled faintly. Half up front, Garaphort pointed out. Mr. Leonardo readily handed over the thick envelope he had prepared. The bounty hunter took the money and stormed off. Garaphort was sitting at the table in his hotel room, but his thoughts preoccupied him more than the meal did. As he sighed, pain shot through his side, but he still smiled. The proximity of the woman coming through the door was making his problems seem insignificant. Eve arrived from the other room. They took separate rooms. They had spent the last few days together, but Eve made it crystal clear that physical contact was out of the question. They bought some food in the afternoon, but ate it in their temporary residence so they could talk in peace. Garaphor had unusually strong feelings for the woman who had earlier stitched up the puncture wound on his calf, which had been torn open by exertion, and applied a cold poultice to his bruised side. After the swelling had subsided, she bandaged his chest. The recommended few days' rest, of course, didn't happen. Garaphor could have dressed his wounds himself, but he was happy to accept the assistance. "What's on your mind?" Garaphor did not answer. "I don't understand why you would do such a thing. You should go and find a normal town where you can get a normal job. With the skills you have, I'm sure you'd be employed in research and development." Garaphor shook his head in puzzlement. "What are you talking about? I don't have any qualifications or papers. They wouldn't even talk to me. I think it's enough to show them your armor. I've never seen anything so complex." "That's not how it works. Anyone who checks me out will find out who I am." Garaphor didn't want to appear skeptical, but with the weight of Mr. Leonardo's words on his shoulders, he was unable to be optimistic. "I'm grateful to you for protecting me, but I couldn't live with murder. There's no way." She couldn't find the right words. She was attracted to Garaphor for some reason, but she did all she could to suppress it. She was so naive and immature that when she had loved for the first time, it almost killed her. After that, she had no intention of letting herself fall for him. But recently, she had somehow ended up in Garaphor's arms, and she was haunted by the memory of the sweet embrace. She shook his head. "Murder is a crime, not only by law, but in itself." All Garaphor could manage was a bitter laugh. "You're right. I never wanted to become a murderer, but life is complicated." He spoke instinctively without thinking. "I know you didn't want this," Eve said. "But if you're not willing to change, we'll have to part soon." "She talks as if she can imagine staying with me," Garaphor thought, his heart pounding. "It's not up to me to change." He remembered the impossible task. "I'm trapped in the wake of my past. I can't get rid of it." "You can do it," Eve encouraged him with a smile. Garaphor almost believed her words, looking at her with a shake of his head. "I never thought beauty mattered so much. Beautiful people can allow themselves more than others. It doesn't matter if she is selfish or inconsiderate, people around her are very forgiving." What made Eve so attractive was that she didn't seem to abuse the opportunities that her looks provided for her. Garaphor, despite barely knowing her, felt like he would do almost anything for her simply because of her boundless beauty. He hated himself for that. He hated that she had this power over him. Gar, annoyed, tried to change the subject. He wanted to distract himself with concrete, understandable things. He knew that a man like him had no business with Eve. "I have to go and fix the armor and the car." "Go ahead," Eve said nonchalantly, which hurt Garaphor. "Will do." Garaphor nodded. He couldn't resist giving it a try. "How about you coming with me? After all, you don't have much to do, I suppose," he added, hesitating. "I would like to hear about the world and new beginnings." He lied. He doubted he would hear anything useful from her. He saw her as innocent and uninformed, someone who grew up in a shell, was educated by private tutors, never encountered evil, never having to sacrifice or give up anything. But all that had recently changed, and Garaphor witnessed the strength in her spirit. the courage with which she struggled to keep at bay the anguish of losing her father, which inspired a sort of respect. Eve looked at him. He averted his gaze immediately, but still saw that she was faltering. A timid smile appeared on her face. After all, why not? Their journey took them to a workshop, which was also a scrapyard. From the outside, the junkyard was more striking. Every armor needs rigorous maintenance, so Garaphor had a good relationship with the owner. Regardless of what she says, I have to face Demalochis. Either I kill him or he kills me. I'm surprised he hasn't tracked me down yet. They only spoke a few words at the beginning of the drive. Eve let him think. Then, later, she started talking, telling Gar about important values and the significance of honesty and virtue. Garaphor listened patiently. They arrived. Gar got out of the vehicle. "Please follow me." He turned back after taking his eyes off the blinking malfunction indicator on the dashboard. They followed some oily footprints that led them to a ragged figure who had just shooed away a carrion dog, then continued to wade about in the dirt. He owned everything there. Garaphor's friend picked up a piece of fruit from the ground and wiped it on his shirt. Clearly, he intended to eat it. "It was in your dog's mouth just now," the bounty hunter warned. "I wiped it," replied his friend without looking. His attention was absorbed by the food. "By the way, allow me to introduce a friend. Is the girl here?" Zumba's eyes lit up, but continued with a different tone when he saw Eve. "Good afternoon, ma'am. It's a pleasure to meet you. You are even more astonishing than God described." "Thank you. He is Zumba, a mechanic and salesman. Some time ago he was exercising with music, hence the name. My only friend until now. This is Eve, a nurse and a business manager, my other friend." "Yeah, why are you here?" Zumba looked at Garaphor. They headed for the workshop area, where Zumba usually refurbished or chopped up wreckage. As they walked between the vast piles of metal in the yard, Garaphor revealed his intentions. "TRC magma. I need a heatsink." "We'll find one." Zumba remembered that he had recently dropped the component somewhere. "A bit dented, but in working condition. As you can see, my armor needs repair as well." Garaphor knew this was going to be tougher. Demalochis had used an MZ45 charge to heat the shielding of the Latissimus dorsi and most of the insulation to a colloidal suspension back in Lauren's house. The two materials fused completely. Then the weakened material finally gave in to Motram's mace. The lack of protection gave Garaphor a sense of vulnerability. "You know that Shoenra battle armor is rare. You have to kill someone to get parts," Zumba snarled. Garaphor pursed his lips and furtively glanced at Eve's face. Zumba continued. "I happen to have a replacement from the aftermarket." Garaphor was relieved. Zumba began to show off his empire to Eve, explaining with flailing gestures. Eve showed little interest. Gar started to work on the car. His mind cleared, reassured by the precise and predictable world of instruments. Demalochis is surely on the prowl, and there's no hiding from him. His complexion showed a moody melancholy, but inside he was tormented by anger. He knew this because sometimes trivial things irritated him, things that shouldn't have. My commission? Mr. Leonardo paid me to die. Vile and ruthless. At least I know my life's worth. His thoughts wandered like a stray dog. I still have plans. Well, there's not much to stay for, except for the girl. He nodded. I have to focus on the things I'm leaving behind. Maybe Replacing the burnt-out cell kept his mind occupied for a while. He enjoyed doing something few people have the skill for. He was explaining to an invisible mind reader of his imagination. It's complicated, but important to properly wire the electron tube diodes of the cooling control unit, because miscalibration can lead to extensive wear. Or worse, if the heat from the reactor is not dissipated in time due to insufficient contact, even a reactor overheat can occur. He finished repairing the car, then set to soldering the armor, for which Zumba and Eve had meanwhile brought the materials. He had to form the side and rear shields from the Kevlar glass ceramic sheets. During the monotonous process, he thought about how to present his ideas to his two partners, for which he finally had the financial resources. I have little chance against Demalochis, but I'll do what I can. I must win. "What's up?" Zumba asked. Eve watched in silence. "You said you weren't busy nowadays." "That's right. She needs armor." Garaphor pointed his chin in Eve's direction. "What?" She looked at him like he was asking about her bust size. She didn't even know that was also going to happen soon. Garaphor started to speak over her vehement protest. "Your life is in danger. If you're near me," spoke as if he had secrets. "Anyone could attack us at any time. You could have easily died last time." She stopped sneering. True, she became quiet for a moment. But still, how could I put on such a dirty, oily metal thing? She pulled away, pouting. "Look, keep it clean," Gar huffled. Zumba went off for a tailor's tape measure. He had a wide range of protective equipment. There had to be a suitable one. "First, we need your measurements." The owner of the junkyard began. He handed the tape measure to Garaphor. He himself gathered the protective suit components based on the readings. Garaphor was unable to look at the results from a purely functional perspective. After the measuring, Gar set to work on designing the armor to provide it with the right functions, while Zumba taught Eve how to control the armor and how it worked. Slowly it became clear what tools Eve was willing to use. She didn't want a weapon at all, but she agreed to equip herself with self-defense equipment such as flares, fog grenades, or a grappling hook. She had a shield built into his forearm guard. The stacked plates slide out on both sides if necessary, and a baton with a handguard made of a light alloy to defend herself in close combat. A few days later, Eve was practicing using her armor, and Garaphor was explaining to Zumba. "I was thinking that we could reinforce the mechanism on my left arm so we could put a fixed machine gun on it. Then we could free up some space on my back to place a heavily armored tank for the flamethrower. The flamethrower was inferior in destructive power to other, more conventional weapons. When destruction was needed, Garaphor had very effective grenades. I used the flamethrower for its psychological effect. The fire made him frightening. His opponents would often surrender at the first sight of the pilot flame. I also designed a mechanism that would recharge the grenade launcher's drum when I hung it on my back. They set out to work. Eve would occasionally shout when she didn't understand something. The next day they tested the mechanics. Garaphor was already installing the aiming software. With the help of the eye replacement cameras, the helmet-mounted sight and the electronic suspension, it was possible to aim the machine gun exactly where he was looking, even if his arm was not exactly at the right angle. All went well, the biggest disruption being Eve's scream when a smoke grenade exploded in her hand. She ran headlong through the fog, and, despite all the reassuring words from the boys, only fell silent when she hit her head on the rack that protruded from the pile. Garaphor had no way of knowing where she was. The smoke was designed precisely to block the radar beams. The whiteness dissolved, he went to help the girl sitting on the ground, who had already taken off her helmet and was adjusting her hair. Garaphor was about to say goodbye, putting his hand on Zumba's shoulder. "Thank you for everything. I hope to see you again." He was more emotional than he wanted to be. "We have to go now. We must find a place to stay tonight." "It was nice having you around," Zumba smiled encouragingly. "It was." Garaphor laughed, but Zumba sensed that the laughter wasn't genuine. He detected a terrible burden on his friend, but he knew he couldn't help him. Garaphor would have had time to share the problem if he wanted his help. Zumba did what he could for his friend, but Garaphor had to fight alone. Eve and Garaphor was sitting in the car. They drove to a distant town, starting a 2-hour drive. Garaphor had been avoiding deep conversations for the past few days, pretending to spend all his time on the work. There was nowhere to run in the metal cage. He had no excuse. They had to come to some sort of understanding, especially if he wanted to maintain contact with Eve. Garaphor's hand was on the wheel. He glanced at the girl staring awkwardly into the distance. The side support of the sports seat occasionally pressed against his back. Eve had gone the day before to get ointment for the treatment of the bruise, so the bandage had to be removed from Garaphor's back to avoid excessive absorption of the drug. Eve helped him apply the treatment. "Thanks for the ointment, it really is much better." Garaphor tried to strike up a conversation. "That's only natural," Eve said in a monotone. "I have a cottage in Lunaby. If you like, I'll show you. There are 2 rooms." "Thanks, but I think I'll find something for myself." "Can I help you?" "I know a lot of hostels." "I'll manage." There was a long silence as Garaphor thought about dying and wondered where he had gone wrong. He switched hands. His arm on the steering wheel was beginning to go numb from the slight vibration. He wasn't really watching the road. His body was driving on its own. "Can I ask you a question?" Eve answered only after a short delay. "Sure." "What's wrong with me?" "Wrong? Nothing's wrong. I'm very grateful for everything you've done." "I'm not good enough for you." Garaphor looked at her. Eve crossed her arms. "You and I are very different." Garaphor sighed. He was about to speak when Eve continued. "I can't ask you to change." "Believe me, I would change if I could." Garaphor laughed bitterly. "What do you mean if you could? What do you mean? Do you think it's up to me? That my life is controlled by me?" Garaphor raised his voice even though he didn't mean to. "Who else would be in control?" Eve shook her head. "You don't want to change because you're an adrenaline junkie. You want to be famous, so people will look up to you. You enjoy the danger." "Are you serious? Do you think I arranged this life for myself? What kind of fantasy world?" "Reality is getting in the way, sweetheart. No matter how hard you try, circumstances dictate." God was shouting by them. Eve was getting scared of the firm tone. "I only ever saw you reach people from beneath, looking up. You don't know what it means to want, but do not get." "Well, I do. And still, I tried my best. but sometimes my best just isn't good enough." They were speeding on the highway faster and faster. Eve was made alarmed and anxious by her awareness of danger. No matter if one small mistake leads you astray, you pay. You think I was in charge? Do you think I have a choice now? If you would know. Eve turned her gaze from the road to the hand gripping the steering wheel, then to Garapfor's face. "Please continue." "Never mind." Garaphor backed down. "I want to know." Garaphor stayed silent. He scolded himself for losing his temper again. Usually, he managed to keep his emotions in check. Whatever force that would have driven him to anger only flickered as dormant ember in his soul. But on this occasion it was building up in him to an unusual degree, and he feared what would happen if he let loose the raging emotions. If the fire arose and blazed, consuming all that it could destroy. The scariest thing of all was that he almost looked forward to that day. He stared at the road, clutching the steering wheel with both hands, trying to ignore the girl's demands. "You have no idea how the world works," Garaphor finally blurted out. "I will not let my temper get the better of me," he thought, and that left him in a state of calm, hopeless despair. He felt he had to give up the dream that had haunted him for the past few days. He spoke gently. "I am not the same man I was before the murders. My actions left a stain on me. I have changed, and I can never be at peace with myself again." Eve said nothing, just watched him, and the sight of shame and remorse filled her eyes with tears. "In the beginning we only killed criminals, and it was often enough to catch them or scare them. Now we kill anybody as long as we are paid. The money people are used to us killing for them, and whoever doesn't like it is out of the game." Garaphor fought with his emotions. "I'm not the man I used to be. There's no going back." Eve wanted to say something, but Garaphor wouldn't let her. "No, listen to me. There's something I've been given an assignment. It was impossible to refuse, and it is not the money if that's what you think. I really had no alternative. There's only one way I can take part in what's coming, and that is to fight. But even if it weren't so, I have no chance of escape. I can't go back to a simple life. I know their secrets. I know who I've killed and who hired me. The only thing that protects me is being on the same team as those in control. As long as I'm working for them, they have no reason to kill me. Even that doesn't matter now." "Doesn't matter?" Eve turned to the man with honest empathy. "Never mind. For me, there's no going back. The whole world would have to change for me to be able to start anew, to get a clean slate, and that's not going to happen.